As we join you today, there is more and more concern about the digital divide in Connecticut. What is the digital divide? What does that mean? Well, connection to the internet, either at home or at work, is essential for all aspects of life. But what if you don't have access to connect, or a device to connect with? What if you don't know how to use the device or the internet? And what if you just can't afford the high cost of internet service that promises speeds we may or may not be getting? And what if your job or getting a job depends on having access to the internet at home? Or if your child needs to learn at home and you don't have a way? We don't think of the internet as a utility like electricity, clean water, or heat, but it is. Education, self-employment, telemedicine, civic engagement, social media, connecting to government agencies like Social Security, Medicare, motor vehicles, remote working, and so much more means having affordable access to the internet as a necessity. So who's looking out for Connecticut residents? How do we break it down, and what does it all mean? We'll tell you that and more, including a federal benefit that will provide a discount of up to $50 per month towards internet service for eligible homes, and a one-time discount of up to $100 to purchase a laptop, desktop computer, or tablet from participating providers. I'm Joni Wedler. Stay with us as we invite Burt Cohen, staff attorney and broadband policy coordinator in the Office of Consumer Counsel, to join us for this edition of The Link, the program that links you with the resources in your community. We're glad you're with us as we dive into all things broadband in Connecticut. Leading our expedition is Burt Cohen, a specialist in the field of cable and telecom matters. I'd like to begin by welcoming Attorney Cohen to The Link, and I'd also like to ask you about your background and about your current duties with the Office of Consumer Counsel.
Thank you, Joni. It's so great to be here and nice to see you, and thank you for providing this opportunity for me to discuss these issues with you. I am currently a staff attorney, and in that role serve also as the broadband policy coordinator in the Office of Consumer Counsel. The Office of Consumer Counsel is an independent agency that is staffed by 11 dedicated and committed state employees who work on matters affecting consumers of utilities, electric, water, gas companies, as well as cable and telecom matters. As for me, I kind of view it as like an old Neil Young song, "Comes a Time." The lyrics were, "Comes a time when you're drifting, comes a time when you settle down," and I settled down with the Office of Consumer Counsel.
And aren't we lucky to have you there with the experience that you have? Your background was prior to coming to the Office of Consumer Counsel many years.
Yeah, I was a lawyer in private practice for over 30 years, representing initially cable companies and some telecom companies, and then ultimately later in my career working with municipalities on primarily telecommunications issues.
So we're happy you're leading us down this broadband path, and I'd like to get the terminology out of the way, because when I asked people about the digital divide, many people didn't know what that meant. So when we hear terms like the internet, broadband, and we hear digital inclusion or digital divide, are they all the same? And what are the differences?
Well, there's nuances, but they ultimately get to the same place. The idea is making sure that all residents, not just of Connecticut, but of our fine country, have the ability to participate fully on their economic, political, social, and educational life. So, for instance, You need to have connectivity. You need to have an internet service provider that can reach your house. That's one leg of the chair. You need to have a device to use the internet, whether it's a laptop, a personal computer, or a tablet. That's the second leg of the chair. The third leg of the chair is you have to have the service, and you have to be able to afford the service. And finally, the term that I call digital literacy component is you need to know how to use that device, how to access the internet, how to use that in a way, whether it's for education and remote learning or doing your homework, or for remote work, as many of us had to do during the COVID-19 pandemic, or for applying for unemployment benefits, or Social Security, or other benefits, as well as for education and entertainment purposes.
Well, Attorney Cohen, when we look at why we're hearing more about digital inclusion and connectivity than I think we have ever before, not only in Connecticut, but across the country. What was the start of that? Was it?
Well, it's always been there, but I think when the internet access first started to become a little bit more ubiquitous, everybody could have access to it. It was a nice to have. But with COVID, we learned it was a must-have service. It was a must-have service. So we look at, COVID really opened up the minds, the ears and eyes of policymakers, lawmakers, government officials to the fact that everybody needed to be connected and have access to the internet.
For school, for work, and I believe Governor Lamont has said that the new normal is, a hybrid work environment. Some of us are working from home at sometimes, in the office sometimes, and so the necessity to have not only access, but speeds, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But can you talk about, let's lay the foundation for what the digital divide looks like in Connecticut. How many households are we talking about that, or residents that don't have access?
Well, the sad truth is that we don't have the precise numbers. There are some statistics that are as low as 30,000 households, that are some as high as 380,000 households. But we will have that data because Governor Lamont proposed and the General Assembly passed into law a statute that requires our state to develop a granular, which means an address by address map that will show, what broadband speeds one can receive at that address, as well as which providers will be serving that address. But let's look at the bigger picture, as you asked initially. So, going into the pandemic, we had approximately just under 25% of the homes in Connecticut, entire homes, did not have access to the internet. That was what the data showed, and that was what was reported in the Digital Divide in Connecticut report that was released in the fall of 2020. So that was going into the internet. Now, when you do a little bit deeper dive into the numbers, you see something that's a little bit more disturbing. You see that low-income households, over 30%, over one-third of low-income households did not have access to the internet. Over one-third of seniors, 65 years and older, did not have access to the internet. You take it down even more in terms of the ethnicity, people of color, again, Hispanics and people of color. Again, more than one-third of them did not have access to wireline broadband service going into the pandemic. So that was what we were faced with, when COVID hit. Schools were closed, businesses, commercial establishments were closed. So what the state had to do and what Governor Lamont did was to put together a team that his office coordinated. That it just happened that I joined the Office of Consumer Counsel in May of 2020. I was there a couple of days, and the governor's office calls. Guess what?
Yeah.
We've got some work to do. In any event, so that gives you the overview of going into the pandemic, what we were looking at.
So when you got your feet wet in the whole system here with what was in front of you, what did you see as some of the problems that Connecticut was facing to close the gap?
Sure. Well, initially, I mean, the number one issue was taking care of the kids in school.
Okay.
Because schools were closed in March, and there was a high number of people that young students that were not able to log into classes, were not able to do that. They did not have devices, they did not have internet access at their homes, and so those people were disadvantaged. So that was number one, and so that was the number one job. So with that, Governor Lamont, we helped him develop, and he announced and funded the Everyone Learns initiative, which was announced in the summer of 2020, which was a tremendous endeavor and it was a good example of truly state employees working from different agencies. We had not only the governor's office, we had Department of Economic and Community Development, we had the Commission for Educational Technology, Department of Administrative Services, along with our office, the Office of Consumer Counsel, all working together on developing that. And with that, we got every student who couldn't afford one a device, and every student who qualified because of income status, we were able to get them internet service through a cable broadband provider, and that was continued also this year. Just in case we go into a remote learning situation.
And you had to do that quickly because there was time was wasting and kids didn't have access. But let's talk about what's happening on the ground in Connecticut. Broadband services provided by.
Okay, there are basically three categories of broadband services providers in Connecticut, and I'm focusing now on the wireline provisions of services because that's more ubiquitous. So we have the cable companies are the dominant broadband provider.
Your Comcast, Cox,
Charter, Altice, and Atlantic Broadband, and we have 5 of those. We also have Frontier Communications, but Frontier. Again, they acquired SNET in 2014 from the AT&T, and a lot of the technology was antiquated. Let me rephrase that. That's probably an unfair characterization. It was a lot of old telephone network that Frontier had acquired. So. That type of facility does not provide, in all cases, broadband level speed, which is set by the FCC. So, and that is a very low speed rate, which is 25 megabits downstream, downstream is when you get your Netflix, you watch videos on YouTube. Upstream is more when you send things up like photographs or Zoom calls. That's more upstream. So it's 25 download, 23 megabits per second upload. Governor Lamont, through his bill, has us set as a goal within 4 years for 1 gigabit download and 200 megabits upload.
Fantastic.
So that will be, and again, there are some providers that do have the ability to provide that service, and many of them say they're going to do even better than that. And that's terrific, and we hope it's ubiquitous and we have competitive providers. But we also want to make sure that people can afford the service. But before we go to affordability and the other issues, I also do want to mention that we do have one competitive provider out there that is chugging along called NetSpeed. They provide a very good service at a moderate price, and we are hoping that they expand their footprint, so to speak, for the rest of Connecticut.
Now, you mentioned earlier that Connecticut has no granular broadband map. And by granular, you mean point to point.
Point to point.
Okay. And is that one of, in order to measure coverage, et cetera? Because we're talking about rural areas that may not have access. We're going to come back to speed tests in a minute because many of us may be paying for speed that we think we're getting. Are we really getting it? And what happens to the data when you do different speed tests on your computer? Does the government use that data, and how do they use that data? So is there an initiative in place to develop this granular map by a certain period of time?
Yes.
Okay. I won't
Are you cross-examining me? No, seriously. Yes, no. That is now in the hands of the Office of Policy and Management. They have what's called GIS mapping specialists. They have two people that right now have been focusing on broadband with me for the last almost year. So they are totally up to speed. Now, we do have access to a national broadband map. It's actually called the National Broadband Availability Map, NBAM, which is produced by the NTIA, which is a division of a federal agency, which is a division of the Department of Commerce. In the NBAM, we can get data from that. It's a combination of speed tests, it's a combination of FCC data, and some other databases. But it doesn't provide us, it provides us with great overview information, but it doesn't provide us with the precise, as you put it, point-to-point data that we want every resident of the state of Connecticut to be able to utilize.
Absolutely. And we'll touch on speed. We're already halfway through our program today, and we have so much more to talk about. But we have at the end of the program some speed test links that you've provided. Why is it important for folks to test their speed on the device, and what happens to that data?
That data gets compiled by the speed test providers, which the dominant national ones are Ookla, O-O-K-L-A, Ookla, I love that name.
Yeah.
And MLab. And the MLab databases, these are not, they're not going to put down your address and send it off to some government agency.
Or see where you're going.
And see where you're going.
Yeah.
That's not that. It's just, we're trying to get a measurement of where, you know, what the speed is at your house. And that goes into a larger database so that we can see in the area if all the people in on your street or in your neighborhood do the Ookla test. We have a pretty good idea at that point of what your broadband capabilities are, regardless of what the providers are telling you or the advertised speeds.
Right. Very good to know. Very good. Now let's talk about regulation a minute, because I did watch an interview with Chairman Gillette, PURA's chairman, on regulation of broadband in Connecticut, and she stated that PURA had no regulatory authority, and I don't know if that's true. Is that correct?
This is where in the program I have to say that while I'm here as a representative of the Office of Consumer Counsel, the views that I'm going to offer are mine personally and mine alone, and not to be, they don't necessarily reflect the views of my office or the Lamont administration, although I suspect that many people would agree with what I'm going to suggest. I think we've been oversold that idea that broadband and internet access provided by our cable and telecom companies they're not subject to regulation. I think, you know, that Kool-Aid was first served back in the mid-2000s, and I think we need to start drinking out of a different pitcher, to put it in kind of an analogy term. So here's the deal. Here's the deal. These providers have their facilities on our public streets and highways. That privilege is afforded to them by the state of Connecticut, either the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority or formerly the Connecticut Department of Public Utility Control, the DPUC. Significantly, cable, telecom, broadband providers, there's no limit. They have that right in perpetuity. And so with that privilege comes some responsibilities. And some of those responsibilities the state has oversight in. Safety, aesthetics, making sure that double poles are removed, making sure that there's, that the wires and facilities are maintained and able to withstand weather conditions that might cause outages. We have that right, I believe. Secondly, we have the right to protect our consumers with respect to services that are offered over these facilities. And the truth be told, the law changed, or the FCC changed the law in 2017 when the Trump administration controlled the FCC, and they repealed net neutrality laws. And when they did that, they basically said, we do not regulate broadband. Okay, well, you, the federal government, don't regulate broadband. That does not mean that the state cannot pick up the banner and do some reasonable oversight. And those cases are being litigated. And we're following them very closely. The Attorney General's office, Attorney General Tong, and his assistant AGs who work in this area are participating in those proceedings by reviewing and adding and signing on to briefs. And the cases are going in our favor.
Yes, like in Maine, recently, other states, Vermont, for example, has some initiatives in play, and so that's good to know. Governor
Lamont said, when he was announcing the Everyone Learns initiative, he said that when you look at what the data is, that it is clear that digital equity is become a civil rights issue. And when you look at the data and the impact of the people who are most adversely affected by not having access to the internet, you see that it is a civil rights issue.
So the game plan for Connecticut is obviously educational access for learning. You talked about the granular map, developing plans to move forward, addressing the digital level at all ages. We have to remember that many of our senior population may be daunted by getting onto the internet. Even though they pay for these triple play bundles in order to get lower price on cable and telephone, they're not utilizing the internet at all.
It's so interesting that you say that. I just read an article, maybe it was from AARP, that said that a study reported that 20% of seniors do not know how to access the internet. It may not be that they don't have the means, or they might not have the means, but even if they have the means, they're not sure how to do that. So we need to do more, and again, in terms of training, so that everybody doesn't need to be a computer programmer to use the internet. But you need to have a digital literacy level that allows you to do the things that you need to do.
Yes, and to get the benefits that you need. You may need disability benefits or other benefits. I know of a gentleman who needed to get his Social Security card and the copy of it. In order to do that, many times you have to access these agencies online. Now, the federal government, what are they doing to help close the divide? Are they working with Connecticut? And
yes, and let me also put in a plug for Senator Blumenthal's office, because I am in almost daily communication with them, because there's so much broadband legislation that's being proposed. Right now, there's two main components. Number one was, well, there's three actually. There was an extension of what was called the CARES Act that was enacted at the end of 2020, the last week of 2020. Then there was the American Rescue Plan Act, which was implemented in March. Or enacted in March, I should say, and we are going to get, the state of Connecticut is going to get money from that we will, again, use for capital projects. It has to also be approved by our state legislature, but it's going to be used to close the digital divide with respect to areas where people are not served. There are still pockets in this state that are unserved, the northwestern portion of the state, and there's other pockets in on the western border and the eastern border that, again, we may not have all the data on that, but we want to make darn sure that they get, they have the opportunity to get broadband.
We've got 2 minutes left already, and so we have to mention the emergency broadband benefit. This is very important. So, Burt, what is the emergency broadband benefit, and how can it help those of us?
Well, the emergency broadband benefit it addresses that third stool of your chair, and which is you need to be able to afford the service. It affects affordability. It's a subsidy. Right now, it's up to $50 a month for qualified individuals, and I believe we're going to show some of the qualifications, the qualifying factors that go into this. But in essence, it helps low-income people get onto the internet and get connected. And I know we're running out of time, but I do want to say that as I leave you here today, I just think the viewers need to understand that people in the state of Connecticut, from the governor's office to our office to other state agencies, we know what the problems are. We may not have all the answers right now, but we have been working tirelessly during this pandemic period to help you, and we will continue to do that until we have gotten everybody in the state of Connecticut connected.
Good. Well, we hope you come back and give us some updates and maybe take some consumer questions as well. Our time is over now, but the expedition certainly isn't over. In fact, it's just beginning as we look at giving the opportunity for Connecticut residents to have affordable internet, a device that they can use and know how to use. Thank you, Attorney Cohen, for being our guest today. And for more on the emergency broadband benefit, as well as the recommended speed test links, they will be provided at the end of our program today. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on The Link.